And while Papa, well, in this case, his uncle, George is his uncle, was busy getting pranked by Ukraine, pretending to be Zelensky, and he's sitting there answering the call and disclosing all kind of, yeah, this is a proxy war with Russia, yeah. Well, I tried to do that with Georgia, yeah, ha ha. I mean, just guys, just he's a gift. And then, of course, the greatest gift of all time, his speech about, you can't just go unilaterally, brutally invading places a one man, like I did in Iraq. Classic Bush. But his nephew tried to challenge Ken Paxton, the populist attorney general from Texas, the one who led the election dispute up to the United States Supreme Court on behalf of Trump. And Paxton's had some separate. He was another person that was targeted, along with Madison Cawthorn, J.D. Vance, and other people on the line. But it looks like Paxton's going to win with ease because the Texas Republican primary voter is a very populist voter, and even in a state where his uncle was governor, George P. Bush looks like he's going to go down to not only a defeat, but a bad defeat, which tells you something about between that and his uncle being in the news, ex-President George W. Bush, for disastrous comments about foreign policy, tells you a little bit where the Republican electorate is.
Yeah.
The one caveat to all of that is the Kinzinger-Cawthorn distinction. So, like, people ask me, like some from the anti-war left, they're like, the American people are just bloodthirsty. They've always been bloodthirsty. They killed the Indians, enslaved black people, blah, blah, all that kind of line. And it's like, okay, I get the commie script from the 1970s, but at least you could update it a little bit. But but as to they say Americans really support these various foreign wars that the government has or the CIA has waged. One could go back to, John F. Kennedy, who didn't want Lumumba killed, who they killed him anyway before he could do anything about it. And John Kennedy, who told various officials, including the French ambassador during the attempted coup that the U.S. backed against the French president, against de Gaulle, said, yeah, I'm the president, but I'm not even fully in control of the CIA, so I can't tell you what they did or didn't do. So you have that problem in that you have an unelected bureaucracy often does whatever they want, regardless of elected officials. But the other aspect is the problem of representative government. You just have a gap, and it's best represented in the Kinzinger-Cawthorn distinction in terms of why would somebody vote against their own constituents? The reason is Kinzinger and Cawthorn. Kinzinger voted for impeachment, and he has been the number one congressional cheerleader for the Ukrainian conflict. He's the one who put out Sam Hyde as the ghost of Kiev. I mean, that's who this genius is. Continues to promote a wide range of fake news. We had the Wolverines. He ticked off Amanda Milius, the daughter of John Milius, the great director of Red Dawn and a lot of other great films. Because he did a Red Dawn version, Wolverines, Ukraine was now fighting Red Dawn. That was Red Dawn 3, Ukraine. That was the thing. He actually had T-shirts with it. But that gives you. But so why is he doing that? Why is Kinzinger? Kinzinger's not running for re-election. He would have been crushed. He was a number one target of Trump. He ran as a Tea Party conservative and turned out not to be anything like that once in office. The reason is simple. When he finishes, because he's been why is he in particular obsessed with you promoting the Ukrainian conflict? When he leaves office, he'll get professorship deals. He'll get think tank deals. He'll get media contract deals. He'll get book writing. I mean, look at Jill Biden. She had a bunch of money for a book. So did Hunter Biden. Almost nobody bought the book. It's just disguised money laundering. And by the way, a lot of these book publishing deals are connected to European companies, connected to the EU and German enterprises. Yeah, you dig in a little bit further, and they have some interesting, let's say, political ancestry on some of the German side. But but they're going to get and they get prestige, right? They get the status, they get the honor. You're an important intellectual. You're an important person, and because we'll promote you in the media, in the book world, in the academy, in the think tank world, and you get to write your own check for the rest of your natural born days. By contrast, take Madison Cawthorn. Madison Cawthorn snuck into office. Madison Cawthorn didn't do some constituent things well that he should have. He had a bunch of personal scandals that could become overblown, but could be made a big deal of. But what really drove the establishment nuts was he was very populist on January 6th on the election-related issues. But especially, he had a key decision to make when the whole Ukrainian conflict was coming on board. Had he decided to go on the deep state side, he does not face a meaningful challenge and he wins re-election despite all these other issues. But he decides to be very anti the deep state side. Now, that was very popular within his populist base, but what it led to was full throttle deep state opposition. So all of a sudden he has media hit pieces written out all over the place. They do a mass deep dive into his personal history and smear him every which way but Sunday. And, unless you have no problems or nothing that could be perceived as a problem, and that's going to be almost nobody, that definitely not anybody's in public office, but that's going to be mostly nobody. You're going to run into trouble. They recruited one of the best candidates against him, a state senator from the most not populist, but most populist part of the district. And then 3 Democratic judges, or 3 democratically aligned judges, change his district unilaterally from what the legislature passed and, carve off a big populist rural part of his district so that it's much more rooted in Asheville, which Asheville has a lot of old school, more of a bunch of hippies moved there that, will eat granola and believe in climate change and all that crap. And a good number of them, unaffiliated, could turn over and vote in Republican primary. And then there was unusual turnout tendencies. Now, the good news from a populist perspective, despite all the things, all the massive amount of money he faced, all the media opposition he faced, all the smear campaigns he faced, the changing of his actual congressional district, weird levels of unaffiliated voters voting in the Republican primary from the Asheville area, unusual mail-in balloting and early voting tendencies for that district. Despite all those things, he almost won. But look at Madison Cawthorn's future. There's no think tank's going to give him a job. No media, big institutional network's going to give him a gig. No, Georgetown ain't giving him an adjunct professorship, least of all a commencement speech. No book deal. No, there won't be a big public book publisher. His book will be a lot more popular than a Kinzinger book. Almost no major book publisher is going to sign him up. And that's how the system, the deep state, maintains control, is that your personal well-being is divorced from the well-being of your own constituents and the express interest of your own constituents. And that's how the deep state operates in the United States. The upside is, broadly, their agenda hasn't been more unpopular than any time since after World War I. We're looking at 1920s level populist opposition, back when we had the War Racketeering Committee, et cetera. I mean, if they don't like what Rand Paul is doing, wait till J.D. Vance is in the United States Senate. So, so this is a guy who fought in Iraq and hasn't forgot that they lied to get him there. This is like Frank Church, the greatest reform in the history of the only time the deep state ever faced meaningful opposition. And we can bridge into next the Sussman trial and why I think that won't go places where people think it will go. But the last time the deep state actually faced consequences was after Watergate. And Frank Church got to have a special select committee on intelligence. And he was the one who did all the assassination, MK Ultra, all that stuff. That was all him. Why? Because the NSA, the first person they ever spied on of elected representative was Senator Frank Church. Back when they had populist Democrats from Idaho. It's a whole different history. So I think, but Biden's unpopularity continues to go down and down and down. And his comments today about Taiwan, it tells me that I think now, originally I thought that they're using these investigations to extort him into a certain set of policies. And there may be aspects of that are true, but I think increasingly they may be escalating that personal risk to him to get him to resign because they don't think they can even keep him on a verbal leash. That he really, it's a version of a confession through projection filter. I think you guys call it the mirror principle. Think about everything they've said about Russia during the war was often true about Ukraine. In the same vein, or the West. In the same vein, what they've been saying about Putin, mysterious health problem, might die tomorrow, not even mentally capable. They may be just describing what Joe Biden is. And that they're nervous now that it's not just about staying on the agenda, it's and being a political disaster because Harris is just not a substitute to solve that problem. It may be because they really just can't keep him on script. You can't give him enough pills in Jello to keep them, on board. And so you may see continued escalation of the Biden family investigations. I don't know if Biden lasts another year. If he keeps going off the res like this, I think and when you have people like Kissinger and others in the deep state saying this was really a poorly mapped strategy, then you're going to have even more opposition and reason to push Biden aside and bring Kamala Harris into the White House.
Very interesting. Just going back to your previous question that you put, which is, are we getting recriminations in Europe and are they going to grow? they are going to grow exponentially. The fact that the Poles are criticizing the Norwegians is a sign that, things are getting really bad, because bear in mind, the Poles, having cut themselves off from Russian oil and gas, have to rely on Norway. I mean, that's where it comes from in the EU now. So, I mean, the fact that they're prepared to bite the hand that's literally feeding them shows how ugly the mood in Europe has become. But, and this is the difference, in Europe, we can't resolve these recriminations because the political structures we've created for ourselves, both at the EU level and internally, are such that you can never get a full or proper resolution. Whereas in the United States, you at least in theory can. I mean, you can control the political system up to a point in exactly the way that you said. A person who speaks out of line, he finds that everything is then used to get him out of his congressional district, that he loses his position as a congressperson. He's got no prospects going forward. He can't get his professorship. He can't get his position in the think tank community. He's not going to be able to write his book. You can do that in the United States to a very great extent. But because you are one country and because you have political traditions there, there's always going to be someone else who will come forward. And of course, if there's people who listen and people who support what you do, then that creates a political force. In Europe, we don't have that. Politics is fragmented amongst different countries, and it is much easier to control. And at the EU centre, which remember is where a lot of the decisions are made now, at the EU centre in Brussels, you don't get elections at all. Ursula von der Leyen is not an elected official, nor is Charles Michel, nor is Josep Borrell. None of these people have to face voters. And that makes a decisive difference. And of course, if we're talking about Europe, generally European states, we have these very complicated electoral systems that exist in every European state. We don't have this ability to change policies, to change movements in the way that you do in the United States. Now, I have to say, I am very, very relieved and pleased to hear that you think that you're starting to think that there might be something going to happen with these cases, and that Biden might be out fairly soon. I say that because with every single passing day, I'm really getting more and more concerned that this is an extremely dangerous administration indeed. It's catastrophic in terms of its economic policies. Its social policies are awful. I'm not going to even start on the way it's complete contempt and disregard for law and for due process, and essentially for the safeguards of the Constitution. But I mean, its foreign policy is a complete nightmare. And I have to say, the Chinese, listening to those comments on Taiwan, you have many people have strong feelings about China, but you've got to put that to one side, because whatever it is, it's a power. The Chinese listen to Biden. They hear him say one thing to them in private. He then goes out and he blurts something out like this. They say to themselves, we can't trust this man. He tells us one thing in private. He says and does something else in public. His administration is incredibly dangerous. We have got to start preparing for the war that is to come. Our friends in Russia found that they had to do that. They had no choice but to make their big move in Ukraine, because otherwise they realize that you can't trust Biden. You can't trust this administration. I'm sure the Chinese are saying the same thing. And they had a meeting apparently a few weeks ago of all the top banks in China. And they're all together in Beijing with the ministers, the Chinese officials, preparing for the financial sanctions that the Chinese believe are coming. And of course, they're also looking at filling up their oil reserves with Russian oil, again, because they expect that the administration at some point is going to try and impose some kind of energy blockade on them. And they have been goaded. That's how they see it. I mean, Biden might be blundering. He might be saying all sorts of crazy and stupid things. He may be saying what comes into his head. He may be coming up with all sorts of things. But the way the Chinese see it is that they're being goaded into a war over Taiwan. They don't particularly want to go to war over Taiwan. Why is it in their interests to go into war over Taiwan? But China cannot allow Taiwan to drift away. No Chinese government can survive that. Xi Jinping certainly can't survive it. He's much more likely to survive an oil blockade and financial sanctions than he is to survive the loss of Taiwan. So having a president who has done all these catastrophic things in the economy, and make no mistake, the inflation is his. Again, all of us three were saying that. We were saying that the day he became president and he announced all his massive spending programs. You can go back, you can watch our early programs. We said it's going to result in an inflation crisis. That inflation crisis is going to be transmitted all around the world. And the idea that it's going to be transient is stupid. He's created the inflation crisis. He's created all kinds of other problems as well. He's done real damage to the constitutional and legal system of the United States, coming on top of the damage that has been done previously by Barack Obama and by the deep state with all these other things. We'll talk about the Sussman trial in a moment, I think. But coming on top of that, Biden has taken that a whole massive step further. I can remember in one of our live streams, Robert, you asked us a rhetorical question. Can you ever remember a worse administration than this? The answer is I can't. And not only that, but I can't remember a more dangerous administration than this. So I hope that this old man is shunted away, put out to pasture, that however bad Kamala Harris is, she can't be worse or more dangerous than this. And maybe once he's out of the way, we can start to do some things that will gradually put the pieces together in the United States and give us rational economic policies and realistic foreign policy ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think what saved Biden so far is both Kamala Harris's intense unpopularity publicly, and as vice president, she has surprised. I always told people she was the dumbest lawyer ever dealt with in court. She was the Attorney General of California, and she failed the bar first time. Not a coincidence. People are seeing in live time she is really slow. There's no other way to put it. And so the combination of her public unpopularity, that no matter how bad Biden falls, she stays beneath him, and in institutional doubt that she can't keep a staff, that everybody's like, we don't know if she can, that's the only thing that salvaged Biden so far. But the fact that no matter what he does in Ukraine, I mean, now he's talking about possible war with Russia, possible war with China, and then they even had leak that we're working with Israel to maybe do a war against Iran. It's like, well, we're going to do all three at the same time. Did he confuse Russian roulette with nuclear roulette? I mean, it's just one dumb thing after the next. So, but I think he must have to be completely falling apart for them to want to risk a Kamala presidency, given that from a midterm perspective, she's still more unpopular than Biden. So that's why that may save him through the midterms. But if they get crushed in the midterms anyway, then that's its own thing. But I think increasingly it's his mental state. If we apply that confession through projection filter, that what they're saying about Putin is really true about Biden, somebody that's incompetent, dangerously incompetent, losing emotional control, might die at any moment, that kind of stuff. That I think that increasingly is a Biden, because that would explain what I consider the escalating Justice Department activities. Now, some people think they're just an honest Justice Department investigating where crime goes. Okay, if you believe that, God bless you. There's not a lot of evidence of it since 1980. Outside of that late 1970s period, and even Mark Felt, Deep Throat himself, who was ran COINTELPRO, was a massive criminal at the FBI. That's the real reason why Ben Bradley and Bob Woodward hid his identity from the world. He wasn't this great noble whistleblower. He was a deep state J. Edgar Hoover coup operator who overthrew Nixon just because Nixon didn't make him head of the FBI. But he got to ultimately walk. I mean, those deep state prosecutions of the late 70s disappeared as soon as Reagan got in. He pardoned almost everybody. Since then, nobody can point to me a deep state protected government operator who's been meaningfully criminally prosecuted. You could argue Oliver North, but that was a very political dynamic. It had a bit of a different animal, I think. So as an example, but the sign that they want to put more pressure on Biden is that they're going to taxes. There's no way any of them can survive. The problem with that kind of criminal operation that they were running, which was basically laundering bribes through various lobbying organizations, family members, etc. That's why Hunter was getting paid for briberism. It wasn't because of his sudden oil expertise. And they got him stashed away at a Malibu drug rehab. That's what he's doing in Malibu. It's one of those rehabs that's a private, off the books rehab. So they create these big mansions and they buy them next to each other in Malibu, and they make them small micro rehabs. So there's the big, well-known rehabs, but they weren't going to have Hunter there. They were going to have him in one of these that has only like 8 residents, and he lives next door or lives like down the street from it, that kind of gig. But basically, they got him stashed away so he doesn't say anything stupid to anybody and can't lose any more laptops to hookers in hotels. So that's where that. But the fact they're starting to talk about taxes, that's going to implicate Biden's brother, Biden's sister, and Hunter Biden and Biden himself. Because Biden wasn't living on a Delaware beach house before he got his sweetheart money laundering book deal. After he left the White House, he had that house before then and had other properties and benefits like that before then. He was getting that through laundered money through Hunter, and nobody was paying tax on it. Instead, they had Hollywood lawyers trying to write off liens and things like that. That was another way of bribery. I'll pay your tax. You're going to do this. That's what that was. It was an open secret with Joe Biden when he was vice president. People used to pitch me that they could get my client in a criminal case completely off if my client paid this person this much money because they would talk to Joe Biden who would get rid of it. Now, I kept my client out of that for a lot of reasons, but that's how open it was. I mean, it was a barely hidden secret that for X amount of money, Joe Biden's your man. Now, where he could really deliver was foreign policy. Tough to get criminal cases quashed like that in the United States. Not so hard to get him quashed, say, in Ukraine, hey, here's your $1 billion as long as that case goes away or that prosecutor goes bye-bye. So the fact they're looking at taxes means they're just continuing to escalate. And if they look at the taxes, all of them are going to be implicated in a wide range of criminal conspiracies. That would be political career ending, et cetera. My guess is that they'll never actually bring the prosecution because of where that might lead. You can't tip Hunter over without tipping over a bunch of deep state bad actors. You can't even tip them over without tipping over the biolab in Ukraine problem. So it's tough to tip that over. They don't usually do that route. They threaten it rather than use it. And it's more likely they just get Joe to sign resignation papers. And then the big question, Alexander, is would Kamala actually manage to somehow be worse than Joe Biden? Unfortunately, from my personal experience, or whether that's actually conceivable, it seems inconceivable at the moment. I mean, he's talking about nuclear war with 3 different countries at the same time, no less. It's just insanity. While our economy is collapsing, Richard Barris of the People's Pundit has a poll out at the People's Pundit locals page, which shows that the economic numbers are the worst they've ever been internally. And there was this American subjective definition that both their current conditions and their expectations of the future are both abysmal. 80% of Americans basically think their current situation is bad and think that the future is bad. And that's a bad combination politically, electorally going in to a midterm electorate. It may be that Biden ultimately, if they keep escalating, if people keep seeing these kind of leaks drop of especially tax investigations and hidden money that went back and forth between Biden family members that was never disclosed, that does suggest that we'll randomly see a Joe Biden resignation at some point. They'll prep that for a couple of weeks of some sort of story. I always thought they might whack him with COVID or claim they whacked him with COVID to justify the pandemic thing. But that'd be if you're in the false flag fun universe. But I think
monkeypox.
Yeah, exactly. Monkeypox. That would be very apropos. There's a lot of memes about monkeypox that just makes sense. And with Joe Biden, I mean, we have a living monkey as a president. But but Kamala Harris, it'll also be who she picks as her VP. I mean,
Mm,
there are rumors. You all of a sudden saw Hillary Clinton start to make the rounds again. So we'll see
yeah,
what that means. I have
yeah,
no doubt she would like to get back in, but so we'll see what they do. I don't think they would like to not pull the trigger on that until 2023, because Kamala's still more unpopular than Biden in the national electorate. But they may not have a choice. But I think they'll definitely do it before 2023, because that would also mute various impeachment efforts Republicans may bring when they take over the House. So, but I would say right now, if I was betting odds, 50-50, Biden survives to 2024.
right.
Fulfills his term. Just too many. I don't think they're going to give him like a Ron Brown trip special to the Balkans
Yeah.
kind of thing. Visit a war-torn
Mm,
region in the middle, for commerce purposes while you're under criminal grand jury investigation. But I think that will continue. Now, in the Sussman trial, that I think Durham is doing a massive cover-up operation more than an expose. That doesn't mean he's not exposing important facts in the process, because he is, and that's because I think he never thought Sussman would go to trial. He thought it was like when they went after the Russians, Mueller did. He thought the Russians would never show up to fight, and instead one of the companies did, and he had to drop all the charges ultimately. People forget that aspect because of how embarrassing it was, because he couldn't produce the evidence that confirmed his theory, which was a nonsense theory in my view, about Russian interference in the 2016 election. What's been determined in the Sussman trial is that Hillary Clinton orchestrated Russiagate, that it was a massive criminal operation, really, but at least an illicit operation. And here's what was criminal about it: they lied on their campaign finance reform or campaign finance papers, and claimed that they were paying lawyers for legal expenses. What they were really paying for was a smear operation in Russiagate. Was an October surprise against Trump. And that was Robbie Mook, her campaign manager, confirmed in court that she orchestrated it, organized it, and approved it. Other confirmation throughout the trial is what was really going on is they were also laundering information, laundering intel. And the way it's a classic deep state operation. So it's like if people understand aspects of Ukraine or understand aspects of Russiagate or understand what's happening in the Sussman trial, the best or what to make of the evidence out of the Sussman trial, read Graham Greene's Our Man in Havana or watch the film. Read Joan Le Carre's Taylor of Panama or watch the film. This is how, and it's why, like, people have been asking, Jacob Dreisen made the good point. Why do you have such discrepancy between intelligence operatives and true, honest military analysts? Like, military analysts are just giving you the facts on the ground. Here's da da da. Whereas almost all the fake military analysis coming out of the West, you dig into their biographies, and they're intel operators. That's what they did. They were, even if they were in the army, they were a part of the intelligence at some level. And I think it's part of that whole subculture that Graham Greene captures and John Le Carre captures. They just make stuff up that's convenient, right? Now, that's what Christopher Steele did. Found a bunch of rumors, found a bunch of stories, put them together, called it a dossier. And that was it. And somehow you call it MI6 dossier, and magically it's elevated from crap to truth. And that's what all of Russiagate was. That's what a lot of what we're seeing with Ukraine is. You take bits and pieces and you script a crazy narrative. That's how you get Ghost of Kiev. That's how you get Go to Hell, Russia on Snake Island. That's how you get We Reconquered Snake Island. That's how you get the Great Siege of Kharkiv. While they keep getting beat, surrender, beat, surrender. That's the daily story of the war. That, I think, dynamic is what you see in the Sussman trial, because what they did is they had bogus intel. Oh, hey, there's a secret communication. Dan Abrams, son of Floyd Abrams, the famous New York Times lawyer, the brother of a prominent New York federal judge, the ABC News legal editor, the founder and owner of Law and Crime. He argued with me because his publication, because Rachel Stockman was the editor at the time, her dad being David Stockman, published me about Spygate back in January of 2017. Dan Abrams got blowback because, like, how dare you have somebody saying that anybody was spying on Trump or that there was any of this illicit, laundered information? Because my theory was they took illicit information from illicit spying and surveillance, laundered it through the law firm as legal services for campaign finance reporting purposes, then had the law firm use their political contacts and connections to tell the FBI about it, then had the FBI confirm to the media that such an investigation existed. Then the same source, they would have the same source of bogus intel go to 3 different people and have those 3 people confirm the story independently to one another. right? I mean, it's like Taylor of Panama, Our Man in Havana. It's like a classic version. You just start making up stories, you start adding facts together, and all of a sudden you unleash a wild set of events. That's what Russiagate was. Michael Sussman was this high-level corporate lawyer who was able to get on the phone and get the general counsel to the FBI to just have a chat with him, right? In the middle of a campaign, knowing he's a Democratic lawyer. The reason why he lies to the FBI and says he's not representing a client isn't because the FBI didn't know he was representing a client. It was and that's why he's annoyed, and that's why he's defending the case. The real reason was so that his pals at the FBI on the 7th floor that runs the FBI could put in their internal notes, we don't know that this is client connected, politically connected. And they could then hide the information from the agents downstream who thought they were getting a hot tip of a major criminal investigation, not knowing they got a politically bogus piece of information that's just being relaundered so the press. Because the other reason he goes to the FBI is because the New York Times isn't going to run the story unless they know the FBI is investigating. That's the other scam that's taking place. You get the FBI to investigate, and then they confirm that to the New York Times. So then the New York Times then runs the story. Major FBI criminal investigation. Was Donald Trump in secret communication through Alpha Bank to the Russian government? Like the Russian government's going to communicate. I mean, some of this was just insanity on top of insanity. The FBI's own data analysts, when they looked at this, said they thought a mental patient wrote it. That's what they thought of Russiagate, the dossier. This was just written by a mental patient. This is just so bad technically, so bad analytically, so bad contextually, no one could credibly and intelligently believe it. It turns out these people working for the Clinton campaign were also paid informants by the FBI in separate matters, because it's all part of one deep state, corrupt, collusive world. So it's nice about the Sussman trials that has exposed it all. The downside is this: if John Durham was serious about meaningfully criminally prosecuting and punishing the deep state, he does not cut a sweetheart deal with Kleinsmith. Kleinsmith was the FBI lawyer who they caught red-handed perjuring, falsifying a FISA affidavit, an affidavit to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Court. They gave him a sweetheart deal, didn't require he cooperate, didn't require he turn on anybody. He got no time, and he was relicensed as a lawyer within a year. So once that deal, whereas Kleinsmith was the one who had the dibs on Peter Strzok, had the dibs on James Baker, the FBI, not George Bush's James Baker, but general counsel to James Comey, James Baker. And Strzok is the kind of, you can tell that guy is such a wuss. He would have flipped on everybody if he was actually under the gun. But classic deep state operator. So once he didn't do that, that meant Durham was never going up. So we'll get lots of great intel out of this trial, because I'm sure Durham thought Sussman would cut a plea. He's in D.C., so all the judges like him, all like the Democratic side of the aisle. They gave Kleinsmith a sweet deal. This guy lied as a lawyer in a sworn under penalty of perjury affidavit to the most consequential surveillance organization in the United States, which is the FISA court, because of the scale and scope at what it can order. It goes beyond what a federal district court, frankly, can order. And yet he did no time at all, not even a day, not even one day. Whereas, George Papadopoulos gets one or two things wrong and he has to serve actual jail time. It had nothing to do with institutionalized corruption and mass spying. Mm. So but Sussman won't, because Sussman is that arrogant. This is the part of the deep state, going back to the original part of our conversation. This is the part of the deep state that combines arrogance, corruption, and incompetence. This is not the Kissinger wing. This is the one that's moral compass is just as broken as Kissinger, but their intellectual compass is broken as well, and that's what makes them different and more dangerous. And we're seeing it in the dementia candidate that's present. So Sussman took the case to trial, even though they have him dead to rights. He told them, verbally and in writing, by multiple sworn testimony and by written evidence, I'm not representing a client, when he was. That's a material lie to the FBI. Now, he may have done so. They're all in on it. You lie so that I can lie kind of deal. But that doesn't change it from a criminal law perspective. Still guilty. But he's so arrogant. He's like, how dare you bring me to charge? Do you understand who I am? That's Michael Sussman's approach. That's the only reason we're finding this stuff out, because Durham had to take it to trial. But Durham helped cover up CIA rendition, interrogations, and spying on the Senate back then. He was the special counsel whose report never went public. He's the guy who recommended no criminal prosecutions related to, John le Carré's A Most Wanted Man, Real Living Times in terms of renditions, but also what was happening with illicit interrogations by the CIA. And John Brennan and crew were spying on the Senate during that investigation. He did nothing about that. He's praised as the guy who exposed Whitey Bulger in Boston. What people don't understand is he actually kept it under wraps. His job is to come in, find a couple of scapegoats, and make sure the big players get to walk. That's his goal. It's like if you're going in the mob, pick off a few middlemen, make sure the big guys walk. That's what Durham's expertise is. Because the guy that was connected to Whitey Bulger in Boston, who was in Boston in the 1980s, a certain assistant United States attorney named Robert S. Mueller. Somehow Mueller's name never gets implicated in the Whitey Bulger scandal. That's who and what Durham is. So Durham is not going after Clapper, Brennan, Comey, Baker, Stroke, Clinton, any of them. So that's the unfortunate part of it. But because Sussman's such an arrogant prick, we're getting to see the whole thing, to see the deep state in operation, see a sequel to Our Man in Havana, Taylor in Panama, in live time. If you want to understand how the deep state operates, read the transcript from the Sussman trial.
Yeah. Can I just say, I mean, we did a program about the Sussman trial quite recently. And after we did it, I went away and I said to myself, right, hold on. We got a case against this person, Sussman. We're getting cases now. We got cases that implicate Fusion GPS, this company, and the Perkins Coie, the law firm. What about the FBI? What about the CIA? What about all these people in the permanent state who surely have been involved in this thing to an extraordinary degree? It seems that Durham is not going after any one of these people. Now, I have to say that does seem extraordinary. And I have to also say, I completely agree. If a lawyer, Michael Sussman and Jim Baker, apparently, according to Jim Baker, they were friends. They knew each other. If Jim Baker gets a visit from Michael Sussman, and Michael Sussman in the middle of a campaign tells him, "Well, I got all this information about Alphaback, but I'm from Perkins Coie. You know all about me, but I'm not representing anybody here." You're going to tell me that Jim Baker believes that? That Jim Baker actually believes that Sussman is acting for himself? It's just not credible. It's exactly what you said. It's clearly a device to make it easier for the FBI to launch an investigation and to pretend to the people lower down in the actual people who are doing the investigation at the coalface that this is all based upon genuine information, because it is inconceivable that Jim Baker, who knows Michael Sussman and knows who he is, and the rest of the FBI leadership weren't perfectly well aware of who was putting them up to do it. And of course, we've now also got this information that Brennan was telling Obama, well, Hillary Clinton is coming up with this Russiagate thing, and Obama knows it. Brennan at the CIA know it. And what did they do? They let it happen. Brennan comes along. He tells us that, the Russians are interfering in the election. Obama imposes all these sanctions on Russian diplomats because the Russians are interfering in the election. They, in effect, are colluding, to use the word, in what they always knew was a Hillary Clinton ploy. So it is an investigation. The Durham investigation is very narrowly focused on a small group of people within the Clinton world, but it's not looking at the permanent government of the United States, at the people who are in the FBI, in the CIA, in all the various, in the Department of Justice, all of those things. And ultimately, that is terrible, because it is the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Justice that you look for to protect you from the kind of things that Hillary Clinton was doing. I mean, Hillary Clinton is, let's be straightforward about it, a devious, manipulative, corrupt politician. She is what she is, but she could only be that if she's able to find collaborators within the US's permanent state. And if all of those people are going to be able to walk away unaffected, if James Comey and Brennan and Strzok and all of those other people are able to walk away from these things, then Durham will not have done his job.
And no doubt. I mean, I think what Durham thinks his real job is a cover-up operation. To basically Durham is building a narrative to say it wasn't the FBI or the CIA or the NSA that did anything bad. It was these evil, corrupt middlemen for the Clinton campaign that corrupted the poor FBI and confused the poor NSA and just distracted the CIA. I mean, just it requires, as you note, a disregard of common sense. But that's what the narrative he's building toward is. Unfortunately. So I don't think it will go further than this. There's people that are still out there optimistic that'll go after Andrew McCabe. It's just not happening. Once Klein Smith walked, extremely low possibility. Also just reflects the history of Durham. Sadly, it shows the incapacity of our system to discipline itself. And you kind of see that also in that people think that Sussman may actually get acquitted because the DC jury pool is so bad. We have all these political cases are being tried in D.C., whether it's the January 6th cases, some Trump cases, this case. And the consequence is you're seeing a jury pool that's incapable of impartiality. And including on Sussman's trial are people whose kids play softball with people related to Sussman. You have people who donated to the Clinton campaign and participated in the Clinton campaign, part of the jury's trial. I mean, if Trump was on trial and Trump campaign organizers were on the jury, the left would be going nuts. Yet this is the norm for D.C. A fair jury in D.C. is just not completely crazy, just mostly crazy. And if it will look bad for the judicial system in D.C. if they don't convict Sussman, because those of us who have been critics that have said you can't be impartial in a political case, and are really I think congressmen and senators need to seriously consider getting rid of the District of Columbia as a separate jurisdiction legally in America, because it's worse than Birmingham in the 1950s for civil rights defendants. I mean, it's just a joke. Every January 6th case is just rubber stamp verdict, guilty, 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 guilty. There's no sign of meaningful jury contemplation. They're making a joke out of the jury trial process by allowing DC juries to be even present or definitely dominant in these politically motivated cases. And so many cases related to politics have to go through DC now. So it's already a problem in different states. Like you could have a conservative state, but you have a liberal state capital. So all your political cases go through a liberal state capital system. It's like, this is totally messed up. They need to scratch that. But, District of Columbia was never intended to be what it is now anyway. It should be scrapped as a political legal system, separated out amongst Maryland, Virginia, whatever. But it should not have its own legal system. Especially if they don't convict Sussman on again, he's dead to rights. Did he lie? Yes. Is it proven by written and oral testimony? Yes. Yeah. And yet even he might be acquitted. He was just a low-level actor. So I think so we'll see. Now, I'll say this, the big trial going on in America right now is a trial that makes everybody wonder what is in the water of the British judges. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, everybody watching that trial, it's being watched by millions on a daily basis, including a bunch of LawTube folks, Emily Baker, Nick Rekieta, Legal Bites, all these different people that are all over the place. That are getting millions of views just for broadcasting the Johnny Depp trial, Amber Heard. But everybody watching it is like, she's obviously nuts. He's obviously innocent. That's like a 95-5 opinion. And it's like, how in the world did that British judge believe Amber Heard? It's like, what does that tell you? Every Hollywood celebrity now is like, whatever you do, don't try a case in Britain. Because, people forget they removed jury trial rights. Yeah. I don't know if you call them rights in Britain, but it used to be defamation trials could go to a jury. Absolutely. Now they can't because there was some change that happened, I guess, a few years ago. And now that judge's ruling looks maybe even as bad as the judge's ruling in the Assange case. Yeah. It may be worse from a factual kind of perspective. Any thoughts on how could a judge make such an embarrassing ruling that makes the British judiciary look like a very untrustworthy, unreliable? If you believed Amber Heard, you may be disqualified from being a judge moving forward.
Well, that's absolutely correct. I completely agree. It is a staggering decision, staggering to anybody who isn't aware of the kind of atmosphere that we have in Britain. To be straightforward about this, a judge in Britain who found in favor of Johnny Depp in this kind of case would be in enormously severe difficulties. There would be criticisms of him, abuse in every media newspaper. The Ministry of Justice. You remember we used to have the Lord Chancellor's Department, which I used to have I used to work for it, in effect. I wasn't a civil servant, but I used to have connections with it. Well, that's all been abolished. We now have the Blairite Ministry of Justice. It's profoundly politicized, more so even than the Department of Justice is, I suspect, in the US. But we have a judiciary here that is very, very politicized in a way that the British judiciary was not. And without wanting to go into too many details, in Britain, this is practically a political case because it is a man and a woman. She's saying one thing, he's saying something different. Her allegations are believed. And that's all there is to say.
It's extraordinary. The other thing that's been in a lot of legal news globally is now I don't know how it works outside of the United States, but is the attempt by the Biden administration to change the internal rules at the World Health Organization, which is meeting this week, to create a globalist power that could come in and govern even local governments in the context of a pandemic. And now in the one part of it is to change the internal health regulation rules. And often that's misportrayed, I think, in the media as legally binding. Like, at least in the United States, it's not legally binding at all. But I don't know about other member states, other nations. I don't know if they've passed implementing legislation that automatically delegates or defers power, but not in the U.S. And then there's talk about making that into a treaty. And in the U.S., I know British law is similar on this. Two things have to happen in the U.S. One is it has to pass 2/3 of the Senate. 2/3 of the Senate have to agree to it before it can become a treaty, and then supreme law of the land. But that's often misunderstood. In both U.S. and U.K. jurisprudence, a treaty can only govern international relations. It cannot cover domestic behaviors outside of some unique context. So, for example, tax treaties the United States signs supersedes U.S. domestic tax law as to taxation. The theory, that's where you have an interaction between a domestic action and an international action. Yeah. Theoretically, they're implementing an international action in the tax law context. But generally, even if a treaty passed, the legislative power can't be delegated to the Senate. The Senate can't, through a treaty, do what the Constitution requires, both bicameralism and presentment. Congress, both houses agreeing. In the case of legislation domestically, and in the case of amending the Constitution, requires more than 2/3 of the Senate, requires the states to agree as well. Yeah. So you can't amend the Constitution by treaty. But there's been a lot of misinterpretation. There's been a lot of misrepresentation by the media. There's a media outlet, Wikipedia, suggests that this is legally binding on the world. It's like, no, at least not America, but nor to my knowledge, UK. No. But it shows a greater concern that they're trying to still take the EU model and take it global, and then have unelected bureaucrats. The power they want to give them under the treaty is that if the World Health Organization declares there's a pandemic, that would be up to them unilaterally. There'd be no check on it. They could then have power over local economic issues as long as they said it was pandemic related. And I mean, I'm fighting with Bobby Kennedy against the Food and Drug Administration here in the United States for doing just that. They say, oh, hey, we have emergency powers. And so now all of a sudden we can mismarket a drug, mislabel a drug, mispromote a drug, call a drug a vaccine that doesn't meet the historical medical public definition of vaccine. And they're doing it all in the guise of, hey, we said emergency powers. That's magical dust. No more limitations, no more congressional limitations, no more right for anybody to sue us, no more citizen participation. That's why Bobby Kennedy and I brought suit on that. And that case is ongoing in the Western District of Texas in the division of Waco. But they're talking about it on a global scale. How much, I saw Bolsonaro talk about it, but how much have you seen any blowback through the rest of the world on what's being propounded and proposed by this globalist institution seizing power?
Right. What can I say straight away? First of all, when I first heard about this proposal, I thought this must be wrong. This must be a joke. It is inconceivable that any government would actually come forward and make this kind of proposal, that it would have this body, this international body, suddenly assume direct power, which is it can somehow impose on sovereign governments. Well, the answer is that in Britain, this has been hardly discussed. I mean, hardly anybody knows about it. Outside Britain, outside, if you like, what's now called increasingly the collective West, I think the whole of the world is simply going to just either ignore it or reject it or oppose it. The Russians are certainly not going to agree with it. The Chinese are certainly not going to agree with it. The Indians are certainly not going to agree with it. The commentary there in all of these places, I'm most familiar, obviously, with the Russian, has been completely negative about this whole idea. But for me, what is extraordinary about this is that this administration, I was talking about how it disregards the Constitution, it disregards due process, it disregards law, is actually proposing such an astonishing thing, so that presumably you get a president who doesn't want to take certain steps, who doesn't want to impose ideas on the states. And you have somebody, the WHO, I don't even know where they're based, actually. Is it Geneva somewhere? I've no idea where they are. They are able to then actually overrule, that's the idea as I understand it, what the president of the United States, what the governments of the states of the United States, what they do. Who is coming up with these crazy things? That is why I say this isn't just the worst administration I can remember. It is the most dangerous, because this is a proposal which, make no mistake about it, if it were ever to gain legal force, and thankfully I don't see how it can, short of amending the Constitution of the United States itself, but if it were to gain force, it would eviscerate the Constitution of the United States, and not just of the United States, but of every sovereign government country across the world.
No doubt about it. And I mean, the only other legal thing that popped up was I am increasingly disturbed by the lack of apparent POW respect for what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine on both sides. Though I understand a little bit better politically why Russia is doing what they're doing now. But almost no commentary in the West. Ukraine takes a Russian soldier and prosecutes him for murder for what is clearly covered by the Geneva Convention. As he was ordered by a military official during a military conflict as a military soldier to take a certain action that led to the death of another person that he said his person told him was necessary to protect their lives and to execute military duty. That fits within the Geneva Convention. If you think it's a war crime, it's supposed to be prosecuted later in a different context. You don't presume it and prosecute it as a domestic murder. And yet, I guess, tell you something about Ukrainian justice. It took 2 days. He shows up, charged, guilty. So what kind of process is that?
Well, I know.
Oh, and the only commentary in the West is, evil Russian soldier convicted of war crime. Who actually wasn't convicted of war crime, he was convicted of a murder. But no commentary on what does this tell us about the Ukrainian justice system. Everything they say about the Russian justice system is what's true of the Ukrainian justice system. Complete joke, complete disaster, complete debacle, as presented in this case. And I don't think they have any excuse for not treating this individual as a prisoner of war. At least I still disagree with Russia not treating a bunch of people as prisoners of war that are out of the Donbass. But I understood better why when it was clear that many of these people, the people in the Donbass believe, many of the Azov battalion especially, committed a bunch of crimes against them over the past 8 years. And taking Russia at its word and given some social media commentary I've seen, I think it's probably accurate. When they took certain people out, they had to impose extraordinary security protocols because they believed they didn't have enough control themselves in Donbass to prevent those people from being basically publicly lynched. Because there is a lot of, what you have is a group of people who committed a lot of crimes for the better part of a decade, and some horrific crimes. And so at least I understand why Russia is trying to ameliorate that by saying we'll prosecute them under domestic law. It looks like they're now going to turn them over ultimately. I guess it's going to be done on Rostov. It's going to be over there. But then there's talk that it will be on behalf of and by the Donbass political authorities. So see how all that works. But I am unsettled. I was shocked that there was almost no Western discussion of Ukraine criminally prosecuting someone and putting him in life in prison when he's clearly it's just a patent violation of the Geneva Convention for the whole world to witness. New York Times, not a word. Washington Post, not a word. Wall Street Journal, not a word. British papers, not a word. Major publications in the United States, not a word. Really say, I mean, they kept saying Trump was eviscerating our traditions. We're witnessing real evisceration of one of the most important traditions of all, and that's the Geneva Convention after World War II. And we're witnessing its evisceration in live time to this, often to the celebration and welcome of the West.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. I would say they're not disregarding this story. It's not as if in Britain, at least, we are not commenting about it. On the contrary, we overwhelmingly approve of this thing. We are overwhelmingly approving of an action which has been taken, which grossly violates the Geneva Conventions. And by the way, on the subject of war crimes, virtually every newspaper I have read in Britain, virtually every article that has covered this story, wrongly say that he has been convicted of war crimes. I mean, the whole thing is appalling. It is a hideous legal charade. And by the way, I agree with you also about what the Russians are doing. Now, I don't like the Azov people at all. I think they're ghastly. I find their ideology loathsome. But they have the same rights to the protection of the law as every other human being, every other combatant in a war situation does. And you can't make these kind of exceptions. You can't bend the law in that kind of way, because if you do, then of course you get into a situation where there is in effect no law at all. And given that you especially need law in a war situation to try to preserve some kind of control of what is inherently a deeply brutalizing process, this is a very disturbing thing. Of course, those people should be treated as prisoners of war, and that Russian soldier should be treated as a prisoner of war. At least the Russians are going about it straightforwardly. You could argue that the Ukrainians also are in their own crazy way. But we in the West, The Guardian, the Financial Times, the Times, the BBC, who covered this in this fashion, the Amnesty International, all those organizations, the various barristers' chambers that get involved in these things, the fact that they not only are silent, instead of being silent, they are approving of it, is just quite simply appalling. It is so shocking that, I ask myself, is it really possible that this thing is happening in Britain today? Well, of course it is, and I'm ashamed for my country that we're engaging in this thing.
Absolutely, and it's hopefully we'll see better improvement out of it. But I think pretty much I think we will see Nuremberg 2.0. I think the Russians do plan on presenting that in that way. I think the Ukrainians would have been better off from a simple PR perspective if they would have not rushed the trial of that individual. Do a big TV show of it. Bring in all the testimony that you possibly can, whether it's most credible or not. It told me that they weren't quite as confident about aspects of that case, that they didn't want to publicly expose it to a wide range of they didn't want to see a Johnny Depp Amber Heard version, live. We'll see how it goes. But otherwise, the conflict, I think, has been the biggest loser so far in the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been the globalist visions of George Soros and his light crowd.
I agree.
Because a lot of things are not. Global digital currency ain't coming anytime soon. WHO, global control over pandemics, they can try as much as they want. Legally, politically, probably ain't coming anytime soon. And this is all because they misread Vladimir Putin and Russia, frankly. What it boils down to.
That's absolutely correct. Can I just say, apparently the Ukrainians, just coming back to that story, apparently the Ukrainians are planning to try another 47 Russian prisoners in the same way. There's going to be a whole train of these cases. So, we're only at the beginning of this. But no, fundamentally, I agree. And in fact, going back to globalization and the issue of globalization, I saw that there was a whole group of business leaders who came along to Davos, WEF, and all that World Economic Forum. Never forget that's what it calls itself. Globalization, in a way, was conceived there back in the 60s. Anyway, a whole lot of business leaders came along. They said globalization is dead. It's just been killed. You yourselves killed it. Your sanctions, in fact, destroyed it, because what they did is they've created this new structure, these new systems. And in fact, I was reading again in the Telegraph, somebody actually saying at Davos, now, that we have all of these countries around the world, they're saying, well, if you impose sanctions like that on the Russians, you can do the same to us. So we are all now working to find alternative routes. So globalization is finished. And Vladimir Putin, he played his role, and it was a big one. But the bizarre thing about this is that the initiative to do all this thing, brought it all, brought the temple down, if you like, on everybody's heads, the temple of globalization crashing down. It was done by the primary advocates of globalization themselves, because they misread the Russian economy. They weren't listening to Robert Barnes, who would have pointed out to them the Russians have oil and energy and food, so they'll be all right. They can survive a siege. They didn't listen. They went ahead. They thought that this one-dimensional economy, the size of Paraguay or whatever it is that they say, would come crashing down like a house of cards. And now they've discovered that they were completely wrong. And what's crashing down like a house of cards is the whole structure of globalization that they've spent the last 70 years creating. And as I said, it is one of the great paradoxes and ironies of history that they've done it themselves to themselves.
And just like Napoleon and the Nazis, they forgot not to poke the Russian bear.
Absolutely.
Never poke the bear.
Never poke the bear.
And now they're trying to poke the dragon.
Well, indeed,
yeah, like that. That's an improvement. These people are. I mean, I have my opposition to China's economic policies, cultural policies, social policies, etc. But the idea we should go, like, you look at Trump, he never went on some tirade about even Hong Kong. He didn't do a big thing about that. He didn't do a big thing about the Uyghurs. Didn't do and while Pompeo was doing his thing, Trump himself stayed away from doing too much too provocative about either North Korea or Taiwan. Tried to cut a deal with North Korea, which was sandbagged by Sean Hannity telling him to bring John Bolton on board. But his focus was always economics. It's like, look, where you, China, are in our American opinion hurting our American self-interest, economic self-interest, our employment, our jobs, our wages, our ability, our supply chain independence. We have a right to engage in a different sort of trade relationship with you until that gets fixed. And he tried to leverage it to say, you have some control over North Korea. Let's calm it down a little bit. That was his focus, and that's a reasonable focus. He was never talking about going to war with China over Taiwan. He was never talking about this. He was not grandstanding on issues that are internal to China. One can be critical of him, but he wasn't going to leverage American power to worry about the Uyghurs, to be frank about it. It's like, Uyghurs can take care of the Uyghurs. China, that's an internal problem. You guys deal with it. Very realistic. Very directed at what mattered. Consequential, China's going to do certain things with economic policy. Then in terms of its internal currency that impacts the United States, that's relevant. If China's playing around with bioweapons, even if it's with Fauci's help and facilitation that they're doing so, that's relevant to the United States. But what's happening with the Uyghurs or the others was not going to be at the front of his agenda. That was not a realpolitik focal point of what was in America's interest. This is nuts, trying to provoke a conflict over Taiwan. Now, I see both sides. Like some of the anti-war left crowd pretends Taiwan really wants to be part of China. I saw some of these tweets and comments the other day. It's like, no, the Independence Party hasn't won by double digits in back-to-back elections because all of Taiwan wants to join China. That's just not the case. That doesn't mean they want confrontation either. And it sounds like, it's like we're trying to provoke. I think the only way China goes into Taiwan, given the problems, if they want to go into Taiwan the way Russia did Ukraine, Militarily, that'd be a very difficult thing to achieve. You're talking about 24 million people, an island surrounded by water. You got mountains. You got an urbanly dense community.
Yeah.
That's not an easy battle to win militarily if you don't want to cause any collateral damage. So for all the people saying, "Oh, China would kill them in 5 seconds," I don't know if I'd go there. Not if they're not willing to use certain tactical advantages. But I don't think they do go in when they believe that over time they can build their one country, two systems strategy that at time, because Taiwan has shown in the late 90s, in the mid 2000s, all the way up to 2014, some portion of their public, about 45%, empathetic with that agenda, even though it's the older part of the Taiwanese generation. Why go in? I think they only go in if they really feel provoked to. The U.S. landed weapons right on Taiwan. Now we've got the Japanese gave us some military islands, not just a little bit north of Taiwan, and I understand Taiwan's historic geopolitical significance to the whole South Asia seas, but it doesn't make sense that we would provoke an actual military conflict. That would be insane. Now I'm not as confident as either side about how that would work. It's amazing. It's like people that are pro-Russia, Russia would whoop Europe, Russia would whip America, Russia would whip everybody. It's like, I don't think Putin thinks that. Or vice versa, that the EU, the NATO would wipe Russia off the map. Most simulations show a tie. And that's if you pretend nuclear weapons won't be used, of course, in the process. But in China, similarly, I mean, the military hasn't been tested in a long time. Some doubts about how effective it's big scale and size, big budget. How does that translate? Don't know. But I don't want to find out, for one.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think this is exactly right. I don't think the Chinese, left to themselves, if the situation had been left alone, would be looking at this moment in time to start a war over Taiwan. It is hardly a priority. I mean, the Chinese have lots of other problems. I mean, we tend to forget this, but they're a huge country, lots of problems.
Their zero COVID policy is shrinking their supply chains and beating their economy up.
Well, exactly. So, I mean, the last thing they would want at this moment in time is a major war, which is going to disrupt their economy more and create ever more problems. And can I just say, I think the same was true of Russia with Ukraine. I mean, I don't get the impression that, Vladimir Putin was straining at the leash to unleash the Russian army on Ukraine. Absolutely not. If he'd got what he was asking for, which was not unreasonable or excessive, Ukraine doesn't join NATO. What's the problem? What really is the problem with that?
Just the Minsk Accords that you'd agreed to for 8 years.
Exactly. We wouldn't have been in this situation. And the same is true with Taiwan. I don't think the Chinese want a war over Taiwan. But it seems as if there are some people in Washington that are almost doing everything they can to goad them into doing it. And very dangerously, the President of the United States, either because he's, senile, or because he's a fool, or because he agrees with this policy, seems to be going along with it with these extraordinary statements that he's blurting out. Now, a war with Taiwan, between China and Taiwan, it may not be a good thing for China. It would be a disaster for Taiwan. I can't see how it turns out well in the end for the United States or the world. I mean, if we're going to impose sanctions on China, well, what Donald Trump wanted to do, he wanted to impose tariffs. He wanted to have an industrial policy. People always forget this. He was never able to do it. He never had the time or the political space to get it organized because, well, we all know the reasons. But if you want to reduce your dependence on China and importing of manufacturing goods, by all means, do it. Build up your factories. Organize your own domestic supply chains. Do America first. Remember that? That was the slogan. Do America first. Do it. But at the moment, you haven't done it. You're in fact doing the opposite. All the talk is that you're going to lower tariffs on Chinese goods in order to try to deal with the massive inflation that you've created. So, create a war with China now. Impose sanctions on China now. Interrupt those supply chains when your factories in the United States aren't geared up and ready to replace Chinese goods? Do you really want to do that? Do you really want to push up inflation from 10% to 20%, 30%, 40%? I can remember in Britain in the 70s when it got up as high as 27%. I mean, it can happen. And, that's a developed economy too. But is that the road we're going down? Well, it seems some people in Washington almost are willing us there. And so bad for China, disastrous for Taiwan, not good for the United States or for the American people at all. And China will come through, just as Russia it will, be very disruptive. Their political system will bear it. I've been there. I saw how strong the surveillance mechanisms, the control mechanisms in China are. I think they can handle any problems. I think they still have a very large critical mass of support within their country. And of course, if there's a war over Taiwan, which is seen as having been provoked by the United States, Chinese nationalism will kick in, and nobody should be surprised about that. They'll come through. But whatever tattered remnants of globalization still exist will, of course, all have gone. And in the meantime, the United States will be forced into pursuing that reconstruction of its economy, which perhaps it needs, but in very, very difficult economic conditions of high inflation, of great economic imbalance, and all of this. So, as I say, this is a very dangerous administration.
No doubt. I think what we'll find is that maybe Biden will come out with the second part of Build Back Better. He's got a great idea. He's going to call it the Great Leap Forward.
That's brilliant. I love that. Yeah, the Great Leap Forward. Yes.
Fantastic. Wrap it up, guys.
Why
Absolutely.
not? Yes. Yeah.
I think we covered a ton of ground. You guys covered a lot of topics. Let's wrap it up there. Robert, where can people find you once again?
They can find all the content and create their own at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Fantastic. Thank you, the great Robert Barnes. Thank you, Alexander Mercouris. Guys, all the super chats, all the questions from the locals chat, super chats, Rumble, Odyssey, we will answer them in a dedicated show. And what else? Thank you to our moderators, Zariel, Alan Watson, Reckless Abandon. I think those were the three moderators we had today. Thank you very much for helping us out in the chat, to our great moderators. And thank you to everyone that watched us on Odyssey, on Rumble, on our locals chat, and on YouTube. Thank you once again, Robert. It was a fantastic show. Always great to have Robert with us. And thank you, Alexander. Any final comments before we wrap it up and say goodnight to everybody? Or good morning?
Well, we ended with China. So you remember we have the famous Chinese thing about, may you live in interesting times. Or, well, we certainly do live in very, very interesting times. And, we will be following everything. And we are very, very grateful for Robert for providing us all this enormous insight about what's going on in the United States. Remember, in spite of everything, the growth of Chinese power, the things that the Russians do, it's still the United States where the big decisions, the really pivotal decisions are made. We have to always hope that ultimately the reason will prevail there, and we won't see ever more bizarre and dangerous decisions made in the United States, because whatever happens in Washington, whatever happens in the United States, it resonates globally. And it's so great that Robert can help us through this complex maze that American politics is. Very different from politics anywhere in Europe, by the way.
And hopefully we return to our roots of not going abroad searching for monsters to destroy, as John Quincy Adams warned, lest we become the monster ourselves. And hopefully that the interesting times proverb will be more promising than a curse as we live through these interesting times indeed.
All right. We will leave it there. Take care, everybody.